I would like to welcome Katina Michael, our keynote for today. I don't want to keep her waiting. And as we have her close collaborator here, I would ask Jeremy Pitt to introduce her.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. On Tuesday evening, Agnieszka asked if I would do her a favor, and I said, yes, of course, it's Agnieszka, do anything for Agnieszka. And then she said, well, I'd like you to introduce Katina. And I said, that's not a favor, that's a privilege, that is. Yeah. So it is my real honor to be able to stand here to introduce Katina for you this morning. The headline is Katina is a professor at the Arizona State University in this School for the Future of Innovation and Society, but that's just the headline figure. Underneath it all, Katina has been at the forefront of many significant works. You know, she was critiquing the impact of technology in society for as long as I've known her, and she's one of the first people that's really sort of taken apart implant technology, that recognized the rise of the sort of surveillance society. And of course, it's not just critique, she's very constructive as well. And this is why she's one of the pioneering proponent of public interest technology, which might have an acronym PIT, which I'm sympathetic with. Yeah. So Katina's sort of kind of like the Delphi Oracle, except she's less cryptic, much more profound, much more concise, and really tells you how it is. Yeah. And so for as long as I've known her, she's been one of the most insightful and influential and analytic and yet constructive and extremely kind people and researchers. Yeah. So it is my honor and my pleasure and my privilege to say to Katina this morning, the floor is going to be yours.
Thank you, Jeremy, for those kind words of introduction, and Agnieszka for the invitation to Keynote. I'm sorry, folks, that I'm not there in the flesh. Both Jeremy and Agnieszka know how much I was looking forward to visiting Poland for the first time, but I think I took the instructions literally. Somebody said break a leg, and instead I broke a hand. So I'm in Australia still and need to deliver this long distance, but I've tried my best with one hand and perhaps the aid of PowerPoint, which I never thought I'd say, but PowerPoint has given me a hand this time. Excuse the pun. Now to, I guess, the seriousness of the keynote and that topic that sort of underpins this beautiful conference that has been put together and that I urge should happen again and again and again. And the question of who governs the machine is the question, I think. So today I want to explore that critical question that affects us all. And we're living in an age where technology increasingly shapes our daily lives, our opportunities and our freedoms, but who's really in control? That's the question that most people ask. And through the lens of 5 remarkable thinkers spanning nearly a century, I'll argue that we need democratic approaches to technology governance, especially when it comes to gender equity and AI. And so these 4 questions that you see on the display frame our discussion today. We know that technology isn't neutral. It embodies the values, the biases, and power structures of those who create it. When we look at AI systems discriminating against women in hiring, in lending, in healthcare, we're seeing the manifestation of deeper questions about who gets to shape our technological future and whether our current approach is actually sustainable. And so the 4 questions we are looking at is who controls technology in our society? How does technological power intersect with gender? Can we reclaim democratic oversight of AI systems? And what are the systemic limits to current technological paradigms? And on our philosophical journey, we are going to look at these 4 brilliant women. Simone Weil, who died very young, a philosopher born in France. Hannah Arendt, who studied philosophy but denied philosophy thereafter, calling herself a political theorist, and in many people's eyes, also a historian. Donella Meadows, an environmental scientist who's very well known for systems thinking, and the great Elinor Ostrom, political scientist, because UCLA wouldn't admit her into an economics degree for her higher research. And in fact, she ended up in a department that only had 4 women doing their PhD at the time, and it had been years previously to when a woman had been admitted. Of course, she had the last laugh as the Nobel Prize winner in 2009, and the great joy that I was connected only one from her. Professor Jeremy Pitt did meet her in the flesh, and I'm positive if Professor Ostrom was alive today, even though she would have been advanced in age, that Professor Pitt and Professor Ostrom would have been researching together. Interestingly, none of these 4 women have children, but in many different ways, there were people in their sphere that were their children. Elinor Ostrom, of course, running the workshop with Vincent Ostrom. Vincent was her postgraduate supervisor, at least one of 4. She was so interdisciplinary, she needed an engineer, a sociologist, a political scientist, and an economist to help her through her PhD. But Vincent, 14 years her senior, became the person she was preoccupied with, both as her marriage partner and also in collaboration. And Elinor mentions him as the real McCoy. He wanted to teach game theory, for example, and many other aspects of natural systems because he loved doing it. And he was the one, she said, in many of her interviews. Interestingly, their relationship was quite amazing. When she was away on field trips as they advanced in age, she would always call back to the workshop students to say, "Are you looking after Vincent well enough?" In the case of Hannah Arendt, her well-known supervisors were Martin Heidegger and Karl Jaspers. Amazingly, and we'll hear more about this, she became a refugee from her home country in Germany, fleeing the Holocaust and much more. And Simone Weil even put her own life on the line, going out even to become part of an army, given she believed so much in the cause of freedom. Donella Meadows also died quite young, not as young as Simone Weil, but meningitis got her probably at the peak of her career. She was there estimating how systems potentially, given finite resources in the world, might buckle. But there is one other person here, Jeremy Pitt, who sort of brings all of these different things together, and perhaps not overtly in the case of Simone Weil and Hannah Arendt, but he has spoken to me in years gone by of Simone Weil. And in the context of this particular presentation, we'll be looking at Simone Weil's notions of force, obedience, and the mechanization of the soul, the juxtaposition of gravity and grace. With respect to Hannah Arendt, looking at those concepts of labor, work, and action, and for her, action was the most important part of these 3 principles because it allowed for political engagement and this notion of human natality. Think about what natal means, and in the case of Hannah Arendt, the importance of spontaneity, which she spoke about in many works, but especially the human condition. With respect to Donella Meadows, of course, the systems thinker, these notions of boundaries, and boundaries, of course, explored by Elinor Ostrom thereafter. I have tried to find out whether Donella Meadows knew Elinor Ostrom, and I can't concisely figure on that. And they may have even clashed on a number of points as Donella Meadows looked at population explosions as well as finite resources that, if not carefully conserved and preserved, may well become so finite that they're eliminated. At the same time, Elinor Ostrom was a little bit more positive in her assessment, especially with this notion of common pool resources and commons governance and the importance of institutional design, particularly with an emphasis on polycentricity and self-organized systems. Of course, it took Jeremy Pitt to bring different aspects of these works together, and perhaps He is the only one that actually travails the micro, the meso, and the macro through different types of thinking, and we'll come to that as we get on in the presentation. But for Jeremy's part, it's the contemporary applications to AI and notions of computational justice, of course, with the belief of socio-technical ecological systems, and that emphasis on ecological is that which can also be found in the works of Donella Meadows and Elinor Ostrom. Ostrom, of course, famous for her works in forests, irrigations, fisheries, farming, water catchments, water basins, policing, and so many other cases that she was able to observe and write about in order to win her Nobel Prize along with William Ollerson. We begin with the weight of gravity. This is actually a book on gravity and grace that was brought together by Gustave Thibon. And these were notes. Also available on audiobooks. It may take you between 4 and 6 hours to get through. It's a heavy piece of work and very personal. And Weil uses this metaphor of gravity for mechanical compulsion. She talks about money, technology, and power as downward forces. And of course, these are the things that drive our world today. She talks about the erosion of the interior freedom and ethical responsibility towards one another in particular and towards the planet. She talks about how technology transforms human agency into passive submission at times. We may become automatons in this way. In a nutshell, she describes how modern technology pulls us downward, away from human flourishing and towards mechanical obedience. We become ones and zeros. She saw firsthand, because she worked in factories, and she saw how these systems, bureaucratic structures, and technological regimes strip individuals of their interior freedom, turning them into what I call dead men walking. She has this suspicion about hierarchies, as Elinor Ostrom did when she studied large police command areas and called them heavily bureaucratic. But Weil didn't see this as inevitable, that gravity was it. Against the force of gravity, she posed grace, the human capacity for spiritual uplift, freedom, and ethical action. And this notion of action is what intersects with Hannah Arendt's notion of action. Grace is an upward movement toward freedom. You can break free from gravity. It's for the preservation of human dignity. We can look at this in the self, and ethical action remains possible within whatever context you are in, no matter what has befallen you, no matter what has happened in the past. So a glimmer of hope, even though gravity is the overarching force that we are fighting against, towards the potential to enhance humans for flourishing, care, empathy, love, and all those things that we know are against conflict and against harm. Here is the tension in a diagrammatic way. Gravity in the first triptych, Simone Weil's notion of fighting the enemy, fighting the machine, the system, the technological power, the evil, the negative forces, towards that third triptych in a state of grace. This middle triptych is quite confrontational. I didn't believe, in fact, that Simone Weil, as a philosopher, would go from the thinking to the doing. She was in the Spanish Civil War in 1936, where she joined an anarchist brigade to fight for the Republican side. Though her participation was brief and ended due to an injury. You will see her in uniform if you search her name online. She later served the Free French movement as a political analyst during World War II in London, but died before she could return to France to actively fight the Nazis. Simone Weil's life is one, I believe, of empowerment and the potential for humans to flourish, no matter the context they are in, and to fight the forces that push us downwards. So she grants us this hope to break through and break free from the machine. In The Human Condition, Hannah Arendt emphasizes labor, work, and action. And these are the distinguishing three fundamental human activities: labor, which gives rise to biological life and consumption; work that creates durable objects and world building the way we see it; and action, this political engagement and plurality. Technology, in this instance, threatens to reduce all activity to labor. And this is exactly what Simone Weil deduced also from her life in the factories. Her concern was that technological thinking reduces everything to the level of labor, threatening our capacity for political action. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. Arendt gave us hope through her concept of natality, the human capacity to begin something entirely new. And again, similarities with Simone Weil. No matter how much the individual has fallen, there is the potential to rise. This isn't about determinism or programming, but about our ability to surprise, to act in unexpected ways, to be spontaneous. And the question for technology governance is, do our systems preserve and enhance this human capacity for new beginnings, or do they tie us down invariably? Now, while Simone Weil fought the machine, fought the system, fought the oppression, Arendt fled. This is another way to fight the machine. It's to flee. Hannah Arendt fled Germany in 1933 after being briefly imprisoned by the Gestapo for her Jewish identity and political research. She initially went to France, working with Youth Alaya, before being interned in a French concentration camp during the war. She later escaped, and with the help of the American journalist Varian Fry, immigrated to the United States in 1941, so this turbulent 8-year period. Her experiences as a refugee and political prisoner under the Nazi regime profoundly influenced her work, particularly her analysis of totalitarianism, statelessness, and, as we said, the human condition. Interestingly, when we see our four theorists, all of them had elements of spirituality, beginning with Simone Weil, who loved God and notions of God in different faith systems and identified them in her notebook by name. In the case of Hannah Arendt, she had studied theology as well as philosophy, and although she called herself an agnostic, it was evident from her work that there was a hopeful strand going through talking about faith and religious ideas. So even though she rejected traditional theology per se, her writings show a lifelong engagement with the spiritual and the religious and concepts of love and the Jewish experience of the covenant. Fascinating. In the case of Donella Meadows, it is written that she had a reawakening towards the end of her life, and we will see some of her clips and hear her voice. So you can see that reawakening in her voice post her work on the limits of growth. And interestingly, even though Elinor Ostrom's parents separated when she was younger, she grew up in a Protestant family with ideals. In fact, Elinor Ostrom even gave of her own income when she became chair of the department, to the point that she received $0 for her time in her headship, and gave all that money to new starters in the political science field, the emerging scholars coming through to give them a chance. This was Elinor Ostrom, a practice of giving and sharing, and you can see that in her smile when you listen to her interviews. But back to Arendt, she not only fled the machine, but she could see through the happenings and world events. When she was in the US, she was conscious not only of the killing machines, but machines we couldn't see, but she could see them. She had the ability of foresight. She spoke even towards the end of her life on scandals such as Watergate, surveillance, and the way technology was abused, notions of national security, and so much more. And in this depiction, she identified people, as we know in works like The Banality of Evil, that had simply become cogs in the machine. They did not feel choked, although some of our protagonists in this image do feel like they are being choked by the machine, perhaps the algorithms in our modern age, perhaps constricted or constrained, or their hands tied. But for others who are perhaps oblivious to those wires, perhaps they are the ones giving the commands to the algorithms, so they don't care. They have become resilient in their own way as cogs in the machine, and still others who know clearly what they are doing and still moving in that direction. These wonderful audiovisual recordings of Hannah Arendt must be watched. This interview, in what is known as the last interview before she died of a heart attack midway through one of her last works. She was talking to the French interviewer here about how critical thinking was dangerous, but even more dangerous was not to think at all. And my purposeful choice of these wonderful women today is not only because of the works that they wrote and their relevance to this notion of power, technology, and democracy, but rather they themselves, as they carried themselves throughout their life and stuck to their values and ideals and knew what they were about. Deep thinkers who dared us to dream, deep thinkers who dared us to say what was correct and to take urgent action. And we'll come back to this notion of action afterwards. We go to our next theorist, environmental scientist Donella Dana Meadows, who's renowned for systems thinking and her great work, The Limits to Growth. Importantly, many talk about this hockey stick growth and this ability for more, and more in big tech companies. Although beyond that, Donella was very much about resources all over the world. She built different types of simulations to estimate what would happen in different scenarios. The same was done by Elinor Ostrom, but in a very different way. She looked at the meso layer, whereas Donella Meadows looked at the macro layer and the globe, looking at population, finite resources, and how we could make this work in a sustainable fashion. Importantly, Donella Meadows focused on what I would call systemic change that required us to understand mental models and behavioral change that was linked to structural change. It wasn't just about studying the incoming and outgoing flows, the originating and terminating points, but rather it was about understanding how structures were propelling us forward towards an unsustainable world. And I would like to break here because I think it is important to hear Donella speak. And if I may, I will share a video.
To sustainability, or actually to any other goal, we need a number of steps, a number of tasks, a number of talents. Among them, of course, are we need implementation talents, how to make things happen, how to write laws, how to make policy, how to govern, how to raise money and allocate it, how to muster resources for our goals, all of which I would put in the category of implementation, of making something come into being. Behind that, we need models and information. We need theory. We need to know how to get where we want to go. We need to know how we got up to where we are now, what has gone wrong, what has gone right, how to form the policies to be implemented. And even behind that, we need clarity about our goals. We need to know where we are going. We need to have vision. And that vision has to be articulated. It has to be socially shared and discussed and formulated. It's obvious in the unsustainable world of today that we are lacking in all of these arenas, that we need much more effort in every one of these steps. And we have a world that is not meeting well our goals for sustainability or anything else.
I will be making these videos available to anyone who would like to see them. There are many that I have sourced for this talk. I just wanted you to hear some sound bites of this wonderful woman. As I said, she spoke about shifting paradigms, which was difficult but not impossible. And while we have all this information we call big data coming through, and even business analytics to tell us about constants and growths and stock and outflows and information inflows, she talked really about the importance of leveraging goals of the system and what our vision was. In this talk, she talks about this workshop that she held on ending hunger. And nobody wanted to talk about this notion and this capacity and capability to end hunger. But it took individuals, the best experts in the world, about 2 days to come to terms with the fact that hunger could be resolved and addressed if everybody came together and there was a mindset shift or a paradigm shift. And as we work down the iceberg model, right down to the mental models down the bottom, which are the hardest to change, this is where the power is to transcend paradigms and to shift them together towards a sustainable future, whether we're talking about AI algorithms or other things. It's the deeper levels beyond the information flows. So if we summate to this point, Weil and Arendt, they were diagnosing technological domination, even if the systems they were talking about were not factory systems, but they were also people systems, systems of oppression. Whereas Meadows at the macro layer was looking at systems perspectives on sustainable change. But here is where Elinor Ostrom's work on the need for democratic governance approaches comes in, moving from individual to institutional solutions, moving from the micro meso to meso macro. Elinor Ostrom revolutionized our understanding of commons governance. While economists assumed shared resources would inevitably be overexploited, Ostrom found thousands of examples where communities successfully managed shared resources through democratic participatory institutions. This directly contradicts the tragedy of the commons narrative, often used to justify technocratic control. What she did is she built a computer model with game theory specialists, and she had a particular number of variables in this particular simulation. She got individuals to sit down at the terminals. They couldn't see each other. It was a blinded experiment, and they were just given tokens that they could spend on a particular resource. She found in almost all cases of this simulation running that people came into conflict with how they wanted to use the resources. They over-exploited. But once she removed the blind experiment and allowed people to communicate in the workshop to work together in order to solve how they would use a particular common pool resource, lo and behold, there was greater productivity, less harm in the community of stakeholders, and there was never overexploitation, which led her into an investigation of natural resources that had existed for more than 200 years each. And she went through and looked at case studies on what those common elements were. She said there were no two cases that had exactly the same design elements or criteria, but that she had to go up a level to generalize, and that these 8 design principles was what emerged. In her talks when she won the Nobel Prize, it was not that these design principles should be used, but could be used in particular real-world cases. She said could and not should, because she always gave freedom to the institutions and individuals in the field who had managed the resources for so long. She said, well, these are the ones that seem to be common across all the cases that she studied in peer-reviewed literature, and had surveyed, in some cases, of 18,000 individual survey respondents or more in different contexts. But she, again, gave freedom. It wasn't always top down or bottom up. It wasn't always use these norms and it will work. It was always what has worked for you and what can we provide as well from the professional expertise that has not been known to this community, but it was always up to the communities to choose the way forward. While Ostrom didn't focus specifically on digital technology, she understood how technology would support democratic institutions. She saw technology as an enabler, the potential for monitoring resources, information sharing between different stakeholders at different scales, coordination, participation, and adaptive learning, all crucial for legitimate governance today of complex systems like AI. And perhaps, given how Professor Pitt has carried on this motif, I would say he sees technology as commons. The question is if technology or access to the internet is like the air we breathe. And for many of us, it is. We can't think about being without a phone or an email address. It would likely render us a non-person. So AI systems affect shared social resources. So Ostrom's principles can become directly applicable to this question of AI we will be discussing from here on. When an AI system makes decisions about hiring, lending, or policing, it's managing a commons that affects entire communities. We need collective governance mechanisms, as Jeremy has often told us in his articles, not just market or state controlled. And so if we compare these theorists, we can see that Donella Meadows focused predominantly on the macro, global system dynamics, pluses and minuses. Simone Weil in Gravity and Grace on the inner spiritual dynamics, which we bring to the table every single day. We cannot talk about collective systems if we ourselves are at war with ourselves or our neighbor. It is highly important that if we talk about collective action, that we begin with gravity and grace, and hopefully more towards grace than gravity. Hannah Arendt's overall corpus did touch on various scales, but for the greater part, she did talk about the macro as well, totalitarianism, revolutions, and so forth, but really was concerned with the public sphere and civic institutions. Of course, in the human condition, we look at the public realm and shared practices, and again, that notion of shared practices, shared resources. And Elinor Ostrom ticks across the board, but predominantly at the meso layer, although she too talked to farmers, talked to irrigation specialists, talked to basin authorities, for example, police commands. She was well known for driving and studying policing and polycentricity by going at the back of a police vehicle. But it brings us to Professor Pitt, who has worked at all these layers to bring all these things together. And I really think there's something important in his work. The micro foundations, the individual agents and the norms and the trust elements, the meso level, and very well renowned for his work on multi-agent systems, the socio-technical institutions and electronic institutions, and the macro scale, the implications in governance, sustainability, digital justice, and collective platforms. Which leads us to his major work, although he has many authored and edited books and many authored papers and editor of special issues, where Agnieszka, myself, Dr. Robert Abbas, and so many others have had the joy of submitting our work to. But Jeremy Pitt takes Ostrom's proven principles and applies them to digital systems, asking, how can we design AI and other technologies to embody democratic values? His work on computational justice provides a framework for building fairness into technological systems while addressing the systemic sustainability concerns raised by Meadows. And this, of course, is in his work on socio-technical ecological systems. And here I would like to share another video, only 5 minutes, of a summary that I really can't find anywhere else and would not be able to say it in my own words. Forgive me, Jeremy, this may be a little bit embarrassing to see yourself, but it is important because you summate what most of us are thinking, but have never said in the public sphere.
And the consequence of this experience as we undergo this transformative process, the digital transformation to the digital society, is twofold. First of all, there's the well-established digital divide between those who are connected and those who are not. And this inequity is already manifest in regard to age, gender, geography, education attainments, and even assets. The Matthew effect, where the rich get richer, is very much in evidence. So for those already with assets, such as roof-mounted domestic wind turbines and electric vehicles, if there's a storm, then you can actually be paid to charge your own electric vehicle. Whether the people who are cold and hungry in that storm actually have to make a choice between whether they heat their food or they heat their house. And this divide has been made starkly apparent amongst UK children during the pandemic lockdowns. Those who had access to personal laptops and unlimited broadband connectivity actually were able to maintain a decent level of education. But those who had to share equipment or on pay-as-you-go data contracts were significantly disadvantaged as a result. The second consequence that might come about from the digital divide is actually what we might call the digitally divided. It's the extraction and appropriation of data, which effectively creates a two-tier system between those who actually have power in the digital society and those who do not. And one example has already been given here, this idea that you're actually able to put a fence, if you like, around digital data and say, right, now this belongs to me as the accumulator and the aggregator of the data, despite the fact that all this data has been generated by someone else, or actually a lot of someone else's, and the value of that is going to accrue to the aggregator and not to the people that are actually generating the data. Now, you might get some nugatory service in response to that, but this is just basically not an equitable exchange. I would argue that, like ownership of the land, which we could think of colonial extraction, this is digital extraction. There's extraction of value from the people that are actually doing the work. And I would argue there's no social justice or civic dignity in this. And in fact, I can point to 7 more examples of the asymmetry of power in the digital society, which relate to platformization, community marginalization, the gatekeeping of knowledge, addiction by design, the iron triangle of the big tech, parliament and academia, differentiated pricing, and even underemployment. So briefly looking at each of these, platformization is how the network effect at the application layer of the internet results in what has been called the platform economy. So in this economic model, work is done at the edge, but all the revenue accrues in the center. And this effectively gives power to the platform owner, in particular power over the means of social coordination. And this is exacerbated further if the platform owner is a transnational organization who's not subject to national taxation or national laws. That means some percentage of every transaction is extracted from a local economy and aggregated elsewhere. Now, the neo-colonialism afforded by digital platforms can result actually in a suppression of economic activity in the long term, and the displacement of economic activity as a platform for qualitative values. It is the case that if I have a pound coin, that pound coin, if you like, is a force multiplier. It's not just that I spend it, but the person whose service I spend it on spends it, and so on. And this is why we refer to money being in circulation, because it actually creates a platform of economic activity like airflow under a wing, under which other values can be built. If you fragment that and fragment the economy, those values start being dissipated as people start looking towards survival of themselves. And so, actually, it turns out the public ownership of services, and in the UK, we can see how privatization is unraveling in the way that energy prices are going through the roof. Effluence is being streamed into our rivers. The hospitals are being slowly forced under for the work that they have to do. And our transportation system is a mess. Yeah? And so, it is clearly the public ownership of service that needs to be reconsidered as if they are essential to the collective well-being of the functioning of the society, then we have to restore that ownership in order to have access to some idea of social justice.
We now move into the final section of the presentation. And I would actually suggest as many of you as possible to go and download the proceedings of the AI for Equity conference, which Maria Zani and many others were present at. It was a landmark conference as far as I was concerned. But the gender dimension, the need for redistributed power and community empowerment. Let's connect all of these pieces together. Current AI systems have consistently encoded and reproduced patriarchal biases. We see this in algorithms that favor men for executive positions, discriminating against women in lending, and perpetuate stereotypes about women's capabilities. This isn't accidental. It reflects the concentration of technological power in male-dominated institutions that are hierarchical in nature. Let me give you some more concrete examples, and for those who want the links, they do actually work. Amazon's hiring algorithm systematically downgraded resumes for women. Credit card algorithms offered women lower credit limits than men with identical financial profiles. Health AI, trained primarily on male data, consistently misdiagnosed women's heart attacks as just anxiety. These aren't bugs. They're features of systems designed without democratic input, without representation from all. Thus, we need to reframe through Weil and Arendt. We can use Meadows' pronouncement that what we need are paradigmatic shifts right down at that bottom layer, the changing of mental models. If we think about Weil's force of grace in the context of gender, we're talking about technology that enhances rather than diminishes women's capacity for ethical action. And Arendt's concept of natality reminds us that women, like all humans, possess the capacity to begin something entirely new, to surprise us, to act in ways that transcend historical patterns of discrimination. The alternative is democratic governance of technology. It's inclusive processes, approaches grounded in deliberation, as we find in Jeremy Pitt's work, pluralism, and institutional reflexivity. Instead of letting tech companies and their predominantly male leadership make unilateral decisions about AI design, we need inclusive processes that bring diverse voices into technology governance. Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps it is why I am here presenting to you today. If it wasn't for people like Jeremy, who handpicked so many women and was so supportive of their careers and trajectories and was empowering, enabling them forward and thrusting them forward towards opportunities, I am positive I would not have been promoted when I would not have been headhunted, and many other things. It takes people in positions of care to grant opportunity to others to see them flourish and not to be negated to systems that provide gravity and gravity alone. In this next point, I would like to underscore, however, despite these differentials, that we are all human and intersectionality and technology matters for all people. We can't talk about gender and technology without acknowledging this concept. Women of color, women of all faiths, women with disabilities, working women who face compound discrimination from AI systems, others in whatever labels others may take and provide themselves as labels or isms that are thrown at people, all this goes equal to all because we are human. Our democratic approach to technology governance must address these intersecting forms of oppression that are thrust upon us to make them enablers, not disablers. And it is in this area, this is the bottom line, Pitt's socio-technical ecological design offers a path forward. Instead of technology serving domination, think about this, we can design systems that service and serve collective autonomy. This means considering things like social justice, technical feasibility, and ecological sustainability together in our design processes. Why aren't we doing that more? And I will give one of the last words to Hannah Arendt here. In this last interview of 1972-1973, she says, action as we, not I. This insight is particularly relevant to public interest technology. We can't solve the problems of technological domination through individual choices or market mechanisms alone. We need collective action, democratic institutions, and systemic change. And this diagram and this paper that was developed and written, first authored by Dr. Robert Abbas and Jeremy and myself, on this notion of how we can bring these concepts together in public interest technology. Technology designed primarily for public benefit, as Ostrom stressed, and Professor Pitt has continued, rather than for private profit to make the few very rich or the shareholders. This means participatory design processes, community accountability, oversight mechanisms that can be built in, and explicit alignment with democratic values and human rights. Let me bring together our philosophical arc. We started with Weil's ethical critique of technological domination. We moved through Arendt's analysis of political action. We learn from Ostrom's institutional design principles and arrive at Pitt's practical framework for democratic technology governance. This isn't just theory, it's a blueprint for action, and we require the next generation to take this action forward. The stakes couldn't be higher. Already, we are given these kinds of images to consider as our current trajectory. I'm not sure what people in the audience feel about robots giving birth to embryos and beyond. Our current trajectory leads towards increasing technological domination and further gender inequality, even if it is in the guise of equality. But we have an alternative future. It's this one here in the second picture. Democratic technology governance that serves human flourishing. This is what it could be like. I'm not saying to do away with the machines. They should be invisible. They shouldn't be choking people. They should be granting people freedom. They should, as Ostrom said, be enablers, supporting our ideals. We should have new vision as stipulated by Meadows. We should be changing the mental models en masse. But there's a tiny window of opportunity right now because we are forming the AI governance frameworks and they're yet to be fully established. Once they are, they will be set in stone. It'll be much harder to do systemic change and paradigmatic shifts. And if we don't do this, we are looking at worlds colliding. It won't stay open forever. In conclusion, who governs the machine? Right now, it's obvious. It's predominantly male tech elites and corporate interests. But it doesn't have to be this way. Through the democratic approaches outlined by our 5 thinkers, from Weil's ethical foundation through Pitt's practical framework, we can ensure that all of us govern these powerful technologies through inclusive participatory processes. The choice is between technological domination and collective autonomy, between gravity and grace. I choose grace. The question is, which future shall we choose to build together? Thank you.
Thank you, Katina, for this fascinating and inspiring, I hope, talk. We have now quite some time for questions. So Who wants to start?
Thank you, Katina, for this presentation. It was really insightful. You made a comment at the beginning when you presented the four women that they did not have any children. Is that sending a message that in order to be successful, you can't have children? Because that's
Oh no,
my
I was
country.
very touched.
No,
Yes.
because that's what's happening in my country. We have the lowest birth rate because women are choosing not to have children to be successful. So that hit me home, literally.
Yes, I think we should ponder on your point. I've been looking at these four faces now for weeks, actually, probably a month, and Jeremy Pitt's face. And without disclosing Jeremy Pitt's situation, he was probably one of the five who is in a different context. The technological domination may be part of the reason why some women are choosing not to have children, but again, this is a highly personal decision that comes back to the micro level. I wondered, in Simone Weil's case, she died very young. She may have had children. She may have decided to marry. Who knows? Had she been given, longer lifetime. Danella Meadows had been married to Dennis Meadows, and Elinor Ostrom to Vincent Ostrom, their collaborators. Fascinating. Hannah Arendt, of course, we know she had a relationship with a supervisor, Martin Heidegger. Very close ties in collaboration and research. But I think circumstances, we look at Arendt and Weil, who were living during the time of conflict. And although we see many children born in our current times of conflict, our heart breaks to see what happens to these children who have been starved to death in many cases. So whether it is conflict, human circumstance, or choice, I don't know, but I think you raise a very valid point. But it hit me very hard when I was searching today to see if Dana Meadows had ever met Elinor Ostrom, and I don't think they did, and they may have clashed on certain ideals and ideas, or they come together very strongly in others, because both were concerned with the environment. But these systems are now making us declare that childbearing phases are a disruption, a career disruption, and no woman I've ever spoken to who's had children ever believes their child was a career disruption. But in order to get promoted, you have to tick this box and then have to go on providing a story about this career disruption. And if you've had 3 kids, then it's 3 career disruptions of X years. But no mother I know has ever called her child a career disruption. But the systems dictate this, and what you are asking actually talks to Arendt's point and Weil's point that these forms of dominance reaffirm these questions, which really should be non-questions. And what are we doing now? We're creating robots that allegedly will get rid of the disruption, and we want the robots to bear the children so they don't have access to an umbilical cord that's human. And you will see this will raise many different opposing and diverse responses from feminists and non-feminists and others, and different people in different circumstances, pro-life, and other. We're going to see if this ability occurs, it will, this question will be even more loaded, probably worth a whole conference or 100 conferences. This is a big thing. We're at the point that the dominance of technology is impacting us in a highly personal way. And this is as one example, as you've just mentioned.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much for this very inspiring talk. My name is Julia, and I wanted to ask you, I think you said sustainable technologies. This is what I caught at some point, and I was just reading about data centers in Texas, and having some protests, and I think of some Brazilian authors, indigenous authors like Elton Krenak, and their critique of our kind of Western idea that we can have sustainable technologies, and they criticize that, saying that it's really hard to think that there can be such a thing as sustainable information technologies where the extraction of the materials is just and then the sustaining these data centers, all this infrastructure has got to a point where it seems impossible. So do you think it's possible to build sustainable technologies, and what is maybe the direction of change that we need to go towards in order to kind of try to get there? Because it seems like we only can think of sustainable technologies if we forget about all this infrastructural part that doesn't really seem to be sustainable. Thank you.
A wonderful question. So many aspects to it. I was the Associate Dean International for an engineering school about 10 years ago. And of course, green computing, green mining, clean air initiatives in different contexts. And much of these had negative externalities that could be quantified. I think the critique from the Brazilian author is warranted, but we can perhaps think of a world where there are more sustainable technologies, where we emphasize the needs of what could make technology sustainable. At the moment, there's such interdependence between our infrastructural systems. Water powers electricity, electricity powers communications, communications powers banking, and banking powers retail. And it's highly meshed and highly interdependent. And we have built this economy relying, as Jeremy says, on platforms, but not only on platforms at the service layer, but going back down, as you say, deep in infrastructure. And we can see some of the innovations, that are coming up, and we can be further critical based on what you've said. For instance, we have too many data centers now above the land. Let's start burying them in the oceans, in particular data storage containers. And this has already begun in cylindrical containers that you just throw into the ocean, onto the ocean floor. We have this problem, of course, in space, where we have space junk and we just leave it up there and hope it doesn't cause some further catastrophe. But on the Earth, it reminds me a bit of what we have done to the landscape. And if you look at some of the literature in the Technology and Society magazine that Jeremy and I have edited in the past, in decades gone by, people would talk about the wires that we could visibly see with our eyes that were the terrestrial cables for telephony, and then the base stations that were put, on top of homes and retail stores and libraries. And is this what our landscape was always meant to be? What is this notion of sustainability? How will we control the use of these technologies? You've seen, even in my own presentation, without sounding hypocritical by saying all these things, use of generative AI, DALL-E 3, to create these images. I must tell you, I tried to do it mindfully. In the least number of prompts as possible, I generated maybe 12 images in total. But this is the temptation. If I can use, I will use. The question is, what are we going to do about setting limits? Going back to Daniela Meadows, how do we understand the interdependencies between these systems? How do we understand public interest? How does a community understand public interest? And this is where Elinor Ostrom came in and went to the field, whether it was in Japan or in places in Africa. And you'll see these photos studies that she did using remote sensing and GIS in the Amazon with collaborators. And you see how mindful they were about registering the points, understanding what was going on, and gathering an understanding of the reliance of food security for locals or crop security for locals. And we have to, I know we live in a globalized world, but I think we have to go back to sustainability in the context of the public interest in small areas. Ostrom again noted that when she studied with Vincent Ostrom, the differences between large area commands and small area commands in policing, she said the small area commands knew exactly what was going on. But to fight corruption in the bigger area commands, what was going on is that people would be rotated, so they didn't really get to know the people in the location, the places, the crime spots, the characters, the ones that could give information as key informants, because they kept being shifted around. But at the local level, people knew, for example, when to fish on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and the limit was, 60 fish or whatever it was. They knew this, and even though it hadn't been written down like in larger institutions, people knew what they should do and were mindful of the practice. In the same way, I think sustainability, even though we're talking about a global scale, all change is local. And some communities, their world build in 2030 or 2050 is very different to the West and their understanding of what world build would look like. In our institutions, we talk about agentic AI now as if it's the magical answer to everything, or how we're going to build intelligent supply chains. To do what? This is the question. What is our goal and what is our vision? And when, I see a disparity in my MBA classes when I talk to students in the classroom who are CIOs, CEOs of organizations. They have these beautiful ideals about visions of sustainability. And yet when they get back to work on the following Monday, they're hit with the same oppression of this is the system. These are your KPIs. This is what you have to meet. Profit, profit, profit. It's not, although there is a minimal shift in some parts of the world and in some organizations, a value shift, a paradigmatic change. But I think we will need to set limits. Otherwise, what are we going to do? Keep growing data centers? And I don't want to mention the big tech companies, but this is the whole thing. When are we going to recalibrate this? And you can find some of the ways, I think, in addressing these problems in Jeremy's work, because Jeremy stresses the ecological, not simply the socio-technical, environmental, and environmental norms, rules, policies, guidelines, soft law, etc. He's talking about ecology. And I think that's the only way, if we understand this methodology and this design process in this way. But, I'm almost stumped by your question. I understand it. I'm clutching at straws to try and respond to it in a logical way. But I don't think infinite resources and hockey stick growth is the answer. And as much as you want and all you can eat, this is what has made us get to this point right now with the pressures on water, on different minerals in the ground. I mean, I look at Arizona, where I was for many years. By 2030, they're saying there won't be any water because any wells that are there or anything that's being used even is being used for mining and not being used for people to drink water. Like, where are our ethics and where are our values? Do we want to see people drink water or do we want to start mining for money? This is the question.
Thank you. We have Corinne was first.
There is no first. Oh, thank you so much for your really inspiring talks. Thank you so much for your clear arguments. And thank you so much also to made this effort to articulate the work of so inspiring women author. So thank you first for all this. If I can, I would add another female author. We help, I think, to bring and to link with the ecological aspect and concern, as you ask, Julia, is Charlotte S. Because
yes.
because I really think that the meeting for Ostrom, the meeting with S was fundamental to link technology and ecology. If I had a few seconds, I will talk about in few seconds about Charlotte S. Because she was librarian. Sorry for my English pronunciation, at the University of Indiana. And she was responsible for setting up the seminar website of Ostrom Seminar, in fact. And what she explained is really very interesting. And she was responsible for entering into the site, the project text, bibliography, and so on. And she did this using hypertext protocol. And once she had entered the text, she realized that she had overloaded the other digital resources set up by the different laboratories of her university. and she saw herself, but the internet is not the unlimited world we are led to believe. It's not an immaterial and non-rival resources. And because I use my university resources and bring all the resources. So, and after that, she wrote with Ostrom an article that really, I love it, in 2003, I think, and the title is Ideas, Artifact, and Facilities, Information as a Common Pool Resources. And she wrote this, can I read it, this quote of this article, wrote with Ostrom? The complex nature of knowledge as a common requires a three-way distinction because it is composed of both human and non-human elements, ideas, artifacts, and facilities. What this implies is that these elements can never be separate. They're from an arrangement, they cannot be separate, and they refer of the ecological makeup of the information. And I think that, sorry to be long, but I think that Charlotte S. is really a fundamental author to explain that, in fact, there is no cloud. There are no clouds. There are really embedded resources. And it helps also to link the question of autonomy with the question of sovereignties, you know. So I think, so thank you so much, Katina. And I think we could add Charlotte S.
I think this is a beautiful comment. Thank you so much for your generosity and sharing this link. I'm smiling because I wish I could be there. This is an incredible conference with incredible brains in the audience. I hope to meet you each one day. Something important, and yes, Charlotte S. I will add, and we will cite. I didn't know this until 4 years ago, and I was up up late at night in Australia, having a meeting with Arizona State University. But Elinor Ostrom actually worked at ASU and set up the Center for Complex Adaptive Systems in the college I'm part of, the College of Global Futures. And I was having an administrative meeting with executives, and I mentioned Jeremy's work and Elinor Ostrom's work about, you know, common pool resources, because our dean at the time was investigating water. And I mentioned Elinor Ostrom's name, and they said, well, what are you talking about? She was here. And this is why they said to me, we have the School of Complex Adaptive Systems alongside the School for the Future of Innovation in Society, School of Sustainability, and the School now of Oceans. We have these 4 schools in the College of Global Futures because it's such an important area. But I did not know. She stressed information and then talked about this notion of, yes, deliberately I have put everything in the cloud today. I could have chosen any Zoom background, but this was the reason. The cloud has infrastructure. It's in the ground. It's taking up resources. So I love your comment. I love the exposure to Charlotte S. And I will look forward. But amazingly, Ostrom's spirit was one of collaboration. She was interviewed the week she received the Nobel Prize, and this interview had been organized from a long time before. And the interviewer from Indiana University, and I'm not sure if it was Charlotte herself, I have to go back and check. It's a beautiful 45-minute interview. And Charlotte is saying, but how did you magnetize all these people to come together? And she says, well, I didn't do anything. They were already at Indiana. And the interviewer says, no, but you brought this interdisciplinarity. Were you mindful of doing this? Did you understand that this wasn't a thing for tenure and for how committees would see papers that are published in different avenues and different disciplines? She said, oh, I didn't care about that. I cared about my students getting tenure. I also cared about them producing solo works. But she said, this interdisciplinarity, we can't solve these complex problems on our own. So she had this infectious capability to bring people together naturally, organically, with this amazing humor and almost, as the interviewer says, nonchalant, like, yes, of course, the engineers can work with the sociologists, and the sociologists can work with the political scientists, and the political scientists have to work with the economists. Of course they do. These are complex, adaptive problems. So I'm not surprised with the emphasis on information, but what a wonderful quote that is. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the. Bravo.
I think we have just time for one more question from Maya.
Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation. Building upon the previous comment, I think because my question was, what do you think about not Ostrom work, but the following of Ostrom work applied to technology, no? And clearly there is the application of it by Ostrom School itself, like members of the Ostrom School, like Charles Hessel. There was also the work of Swiss and English on the success of internet and the open source case, no, that they applied the framework of Ostrom. So, and I agree with this critique about the lack of vision of the sustainability of the knowledge, no? I would add another one, which is why I think this conference is also relevant, which has to do with the humans be involved in the commons and the war rights, in the sense of the commons theory. I think not of the different schools in the commons theory pose the question about individual sustainability, not collective sustainability, but how Wikipedians, for example, have money to eat, no? And that's something that a response that came from the social and solidarity economy, approaching the platform economy, saying, no, we have to find solutions like cooperatives and other ways of work organizing to assure that this is also sustainable for those who work there, no? But beyond this element, my question is not what do you think about the adoption or the development of Ostrom work in Ostrom School and these two critiques, but what do you think about the approach of the cyber scholars like Yochai Benkler or Steve Weber, no? That, and particularly to one of paper by Benkler, it's called Between Spanish Huertas and the Open Road, A Tale of Two Commons, that actually I saw Benkler presenting this paper in front of Ostrom, and I saw their debate, the debate, in which Benkler point that in the commons there are two roads, no? One, it was the Ostrom school referring to the importance of the governance. But then the civil scholars say, what define the commons is not the conditions of the governance. What define the common in the digital sphere is the condition of access. And so if a resource is open access, it's what it become a commons, not necessarily the element that is govern the decision making, but because the new technologies reduce the cost of collective action. So it was not so much about how people organize, but about how the resources access as a public good, no? And the two critiques of sustainability and human work can be also applied to this other approach of the commons, no? Of the civil scholars and the open access as a common. But anyway, what do you think about this other, like the civil scholar vision, no? Of commons as an open source regarding open access regarding the questions that you have posing. Thank you.
Well, firstly to say, I think you're very clever, and I would love to hear your response to this amazing question. Your depth of reading of these scholars is deeper than mine for sure. I do think about open source software. I do think about open access. As scholars, we see this every day. And is it a question of access, or is it a question of the public interest? For example, in terms of collective action, I'm on the steering committee in the US for the National Deep Inference Fabric, which is there to democratize generative AI. It's fascinating as a concept because obviously generative AI uses underlying data sets that are predominantly open source, both inclusive of deep fakes and other things. But I see their hope to democratize access to generative AI systems. But I think this also has multiple levels of inquiry, not simply is an object open, this software open, available to the third sector equally as it is to government agencies and corporations. But is it a question of access? Is it a question of public interest? Is it a question of a collective common pool resource? My hope is one day all resources are open, apart from those that are interpersonal in nature and are private for correspondence between, say, two people, two partners, two close friends. But I think we need to and must have a society that has data, at least, and good quality data, open and accessible. And while I personally don't believe in a blockchain approach for making this open and accessible, we do need some way of understanding the authenticity, the authorship, the vintage, location, and many other facets that would come. And Ostrom, again, with her work on GIS, I mean, geographic information systems are an example, and geo AI is such a powerful mechanism. But cadastral blocks have a location. Yes, postcodes change. They have a location. They have an X and Y coordinate that's a minimum bounding rectangle or a polygon or a point of interest. It also has depth and breadth, and it has elevation and many other points. You can have moving artifacts that will be traced with time, whether they're connected vehicles or assets as they move around organizations or beyond, taken home by employees and so forth, or things that people could borrow that they don't have to buy. And while this may be my ideal world, I want us to compare, based on what you've said, what holds us down in that scenario, the gravity versus the grace, and where we could move towards in order to have full human flourishing. What does that look like? And not to be afraid to dream, because right now we talk about flourishing, but the next thing we do, we use a piece of software that is oppressive, or a form that makes us fill in every criteria, even though this item is private and personal. And they say it's informed consent, but you make me do it, otherwise I can't use the resource. And that's the problem. We're giving away too much. And yet, from a personal, private perspective, but from a shared understanding, we need more. We need more, and we need it to be open. And I would say that is a common pool resource, but it's complex. And your question is much more sophisticated than my answer, but I think I'll leave it there, folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Katina. And just, last but not least, let's give a little bit of time to Jeremy Pitt.
Thank you, Agnieszka. Katina, thank you so much for that wonderful talk. My comment is, of course, you were far too generous to me. The fifth person in that list should, of course, be yourself, but you are far too generous, far too inclusive, and far too attractive of many people in the same way that you've just been talking about. But so I'd like to redo this talk, but putting you in for me. Okay, so yeah.
Thank you, my mentor. I publicly state that. And gee, I'm glad, folks, that Jeremy Pitt sent me an email that I saw in 2006 timeframe, because it completely changed my academic trajectory. And I have, with my fellow collaborators, been the recipients of that care and empathy. But I know you know what I'm talking about. In your own lives, there would have been people like Jeremy, female and male and others, who would have put you on a trajectory that has enabled you to be at this conference, which is no mean feat in itself. And I just wish I was there to hear your presentations. I do actually have a class at past, so I'll have to leave. That one ends at 9 o'clock in Australia's timetable. But thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Agnieszka. And may you have a wonderful rest of conference team.
Thank you, Katina. Again, I think we all go out of this room inspired by your talk. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye, friends. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.